Hi there, Study Finds guy Jeff Allen here with the best bourbons for 2023. Now, those are the ones that are most recommended by expert websites, and we gather all of that information here to make your search much easier. Now, you can get more details at studyfinds.com. Now, let's talk about bourbon. Aged in new charred oak barrels and consisting of at least 51% corn, bourbon is a great choice in whiskey if you're looking for something more complex than your average liquors. Though the differences between bourbon and other whiskeys may seem subtle to beginners, finding the best bourbons can help you appreciate all its diverse flavor profiles have to offer, making it a great addition to your at-home bar. Now, we're here to help. If you're wondering what are the quote-unquote rules for bourbon, Smithsonian Magazine explains for a spirit to be considered bourbon, it must adhere to 6 standard rules. It must be made in the United States, aged in new charred white oak barrels, and be at least 51% corn. It also must be distilled at less than 160 proof. That's 80% alcohol by volume, and entered into a barrel at below 125 proof. Now, lastly, there can be no artificial coloring or flavor. That's the reason Jack Daniel's is a Tennessee whiskey. It's filtered over maple wood chips before bottling. Now, the darker the bourbon, the higher the alcohol content. And for a true taste of its complexities, they say to open your mouth while sipping. Okay, now that you know the basics, let's get to the list. All right, our first on the list, if you're looking for a top-notch bourbon and willing to search high and low to get your hands on a bottle, W.L. Weller's 12-year-old bourbon is one of the best money and time can buy. According to Forbes, quote, the Weller 12-year-old is an outstanding whiskey. On the nose, it's creamy with a hint of caramel and a bit of anise. On the palate, it has the characteristic smoothness of wheated bourbons. It's slightly drying and sweet with distinctive tropical fruit notes. The finish is long and sweet with lingering fruit notes of stone and tropical fruit, unquote. With aromas of lanolin, almond cream corn, and toasty vanilla, bourbon experts highly recommend this choice for its layers and moderate sweetness and intensely smooth finish. Now, Insider.com writes, quote, Buffalo Trace makes some of the best bourbons in the world, including Pappy Van Winkle, Eagle Rare, Weller and E.H. Taylor, Stagg Jr., Blanton's, and more. Unfortunately, demand has made this bourbon difficult to find in stores. So they say to pick these up if you find them at a reasonable price if you happen to run across them. Now, on to number 2. If you like it hot, Elijah Craig's barrel-proof bourbon will surely get the job done. TheSpruceEats.com writes, quote, this bourbon is delicious and depending on the barrel registers between 128 and 140 proof. That's not just high octane, that's rocket fuel. So obviously this whiskey can run a bit hot. They go on to say, while some may take it neat, there's no shame in adding a small ice cube or splash of water so you can appreciate the robust caramel, vanilla, cinnamon spice, and chocolate that make this a truly excellent bourbon without melting your palate, unquote. And this is pretty interesting. The Food Network says legend has it, Baptist minister Elijah Craig is said to be the inventor of bourbon when he accidentally charred oak barrels before storing his whiskey in them. And this, according to GearPatrol.com, quote, it has none of the harshness you'd expect from a 132.2 proof bourbon and doesn't undergo chill filtering. Instead, just using light filtration to remove barrel char flakes, tasting notes include Heath Bar and leather on the nose with cinnamon candies, roasted vanilla, and rye coming through in the palate, unquote. Now on to our third pick. If you're looking for an award-winning bourbon with sweet floral notes and a warm, buttery finish, Old Ezra's 7-year-old bourbon could just do the trick. Let's go back to GearPatrol.com on this one. They say, quote, Luxco's Old Ezra line could be one of the best-kept secrets in whiskey. Bourbon with an age statement and available at barrel strength for a good price? That's nuts in today's whiskey world. It's got a good amount of heat on account of being 117 proof, but you'll still be able to make out classic bourbon tasting notes, unquote. Reviewers also note that though the Kentucky producer only dates back to 1957, the end product stands up against even the most iconic names in the business. Forbes.com says, quote, "On the nose, it offers up creamy vanilla along with dried fruit notes. There's a pronounced caramel flavor on the palate along with dried fruit notes and some pepperiness. It's slightly drying on the palate, likely because of the high proof. The finish is long, sweet, and peppery with lingered dried fruit notes," unquote. Now, our fourth pick is highly rated as one of the top sipping whiskeys with a complex yet well-balanced flavor profile. Insider.com writes, Widow Jane's 10-year-old straight bourbon is, quote, "blended in New York from bourbons distilled in Kentucky, Indiana, and Tennessee. Widow Jane has a distinct, rich flavor profile. When you sip it, this pricey bourbon coats your tongue with a cherry and maple sweetness, plus almond notes. The charred oak comes out in a long, mild finish," unquote. The bourbon is only ever made in 5-barrel batches and is non-chill filtered and proofed, so probably why it's a bit pricey. Why is this bourbon unique? Liquor.com says, quote, "Its team wanted to add something that had the intense taste of New York in each sip, so it cuts that blend with limestone mineral water from the famous Rosendale mines in upstate New York. The distillery's signature 10-year-old bourbon presents a nose of nutmeg, cream vanilla, and a dash of cinnamon, and a palate that flirts with maple syrup, almond, cherry, and orange," unquote. Now, if you're just beginning your foray into the world of bourbon, then our fifth pick, Four Roses Single Barrel, is an excellent and affordable quality find. Remember, you don't want to go super low budget with bourbon, but this won't break the bank either. Esquire says, quote, "If it isn't already, Four Roses should be your go-to budget bourbon. It's great in cocktails, so you can sip it on its own, and it is hands down one of the best bourbons you can find for the price. The single barrel is an excellent whiskey too, but for something tasty and more moderately priced, check out Four Roses Small Batch. The distillery uses 2 mash bills and 5 yeast strains to create 10 different recipes to work with. And 4 of these recipes are used to make small batch," unquote. And the producer of this bourbon is one of Kentucky's finest, dating back to the 1800s. Liquor.com says, quote, "Its single barrel might be the strongest offering in its decorated portfolio thanks to an uncanny balance of potency at 100 proof with a rich smoothness resulting from spending 10 years in a barrel. Aromas of maple syrup and vanilla on the nose give way to ripe stone fruit on the tongue. Straight up or on the rocks, it presents a delicate and lengthy finish that's surprisingly nuanced," unquote. Well, there you have it. Time to hide my keys and time to enjoy. Now, you can check out more info on this and other research by clicking the link in the description below and head on over to studyfinds.com.